Welcome to an all-new episode of Canzano and Wilner, the podcast. Appreciate everybody who is watching us on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe. I'm Jon Canzano. You can find my work at joncanzano.com. He's Jon Wilner. You can find him at wilnerhotline.com. We've got a big episode this week with everything going on in the Pac-12 and the Mountain West Conference. There's probably not a better guest to have on than Karl Benson, who is the former Sun Belt and MAC and WAC Commissioner, a breadth of knowledge and expertise, went to college at Boise State. So there's a little bit of Boise State we can talk about there, but a guy who has lived at Wilner. Why is Karl Benson the right guest for today?
I mean, it's the middle of the college football season. We're talking about realignment, right? It is the story that just never stops. And Karl, like you said, Karl's got firsthand experience with exactly what's happening right now. In 1999, the Mountain West was created out of the WAC, left a bunch of WAC schools behind. He was commissioner of the WAC at the time. He can explain to us exactly what that was like and exactly what the WAC, what the Mountain West, I should say, is going through right now, right? I mean, this is like, he's been on the front lines of this kind of thing from the commissioner's perspective. So I think it's great. And his experience in the Sun Belt, I think, adds, coast to coast institutional knowledge, because certainly the pieces for this whole thing could span, from the Atlantic to the Pacific when all is said and done.
Yeah, it was that the group of four that left the Mountain West to come to the Pac-12 did it in secrecy, right? Very tight-knit group. That first bite for the Pac-12, blindsiding, a lot of people in the Mountain West Conference. And so Karl Benson's lived through some of this. What is Gloria Nevarez's? What's her next move? Is it litigation? Yeah. Is it something else? And without further ado, let's bring him on. The former Sun Belt, Mid-American Conference, and WAC Commissioner Karl Benson now joining us. Thanks for making time, Karl.
Oh, you got your Broncos hat on.
Hey, good morning, fellas. Jon Wilner, since you mentioned it, I had to go to my desk here and pull out the Bronco hat to cover up my bald head so I didn't look like Canzano. But and I don't know what you're covering up on your head, Wilner, but we're proud of our bald heads.
A sight for sore eyes is what I'm covering up. The Broncos are pretty good.
Boy, I tell you what, they let one get away down in Eugene, didn't they? That was a great performance, but a tough loss, that's for sure.
Help us out. Like when, the Pac-12 adds those four Mountain West schools, I have to think you're sitting there going, I lived through this. I know what this is like. What was your reaction when you saw that?
I think my first reaction, like others, was, why did it take so long? I know that, that Scott and his counterpart at Washington State, Anne-Marie, were trying to be patient, and they claimed they had time on their side, but I think that there really was a sense of urgency to get it done, and I think those four schools certainly were at the top of the Mountain West hierarchy. There may have been a couple more, and I think I've talked to both you guys off air about Air Force and UNLV and whether they made the cut, or will they maybe they still will make the cut, but those four certainly have demonstrated a willingness to commit resources to build new stadiums. San Diego State, Colorado State, new stadium, Boise State, a renovated stadium, and so I think that they got the four they needed.
Karl, could you take us through what happened in 1998, 99? You're commissioner of the WAC. And did you hear rumblings that there was going to be this thing called the Mountain West out of nowhere? What was that like?
It wasn't a surprise. It was a shock, but it wasn't a surprise. If you recall, the WAC was a 16-team league back then. We could never decide on permanent divisions, east, west, north, south, and the first 3 years of operation, we did the quads, where we rotated four teams, and BYU and Utah were very unhappy with that structure. And as we tried to move to permanent divisions, somebody was going to get left out of a natural rival. And what was arrived on in the spring of 1998 was that that Air Force was going to go into kind of the eastern half of the league and be separated from Colorado State and Wyoming. And that caused the ire of the three presidents, the two presidents and the general at Air Force at the time. And those three presidents got together to see what it would take to overturn that. And we all know how collegial presidents are. So I wasn't going to be surprised if that got overturned. But in the meantime, BYU and Utah were doing their own little, what do we need to do to get out of here and create a new league. And so those five universities, those presidents met in the famous Denver Airport United Club conference room in May of 1998 and said, let's start a new league. And before the end of the day, they'd called Wyoming, they'd called New Mexico. They called New Mexico, San Diego State, and UNLV, and all of a sudden they had 8 teams. And so that's what I woke up to the next morning, and the rug kind of pulled out from under our foot. And similarly to kind of the Pac-12 announcement was, this is going to be, we're going to go to 6 right now, but, and they didn't have a name at that time, but they referred to themselves as this new league. And they stated that we're going to be an 8-team league for right now, and that just put everybody on alert. How do we get into this new league? And so there's that immediate, what do we have left? What do I have left in terms of the WAC? And fortunately, they didn't go beyond 8. They left us with 8, similarly to what Gloria has with 8 members, and then it went into a rebuild and be straightforward. We're gonna compete and we're gonna kick their ass. And we added Nevada, we added Boise State, we added Louisiana Tech, and for the next 10 years, we really did compete head to head with the Mountain West. And I've already heard from some of the, we always referred to the left behind 8. I don't know what reference they're making to on the Mountain West, but we had that rallying cry. But at the same time, there was still always, Fresno State was camped out in Colorado Springs numerous times trying to get their way into the Mountain West. But in the meantime, they carried the WAC logo, and David Carr shows up on the cover of Sports Illustrated wearing the WAC logo after they had beaten Colorado, Oregon State, and Wisconsin. And we all know what Boise State did on January 1 of 2007. But in between, there was a lot of other success that those left behind schools had. And I think I'm probably most proud of the fact that we competed head to head until they finally took Boise State. They took Fresno State, Nevada. They took Hawaii. They took Utah State. They took San Jose State. In 2012, the WAC finally gave up and got out of the football business, and I moved to the Sun Belt. So that's kind of it kind of gets us to today, and again the similarities that I think are happening with the Mountain West and its members. And you guys got to remember, every one of those Mountain West schools was a WAC member at one time. And so I have affiliation, I have friendships, I have respect for the 4 schools that made the decision, certainly understand the decision they made, but then also have I've got some empathy for Gloria and the 8 that have been left behind.
Yeah, let me ask you about that, because there's strategy now for Gloria Navarro as the Mountain West commissioner. What's the play for the Mountain West? Is it a legal play? Is it does she need to strategically be thinking about how does she fortify her conference to make sure she stays above 8? Is she trying to play defense with maybe UNLV and Air Force? What's the play right now?
I think the litigation piece, unfortunately, has been part of conference expansion and conference realignment. And the WAC had a legal play in place against the 8 for failure to do their fiduciary duty to the corporation. And we went down that path, spent a lot of money on legal fees, and found out that 2 or 3 of those schools were doing exactly what the 8 that left. They were trying to get into another conference, and legal counsel quickly shut that down. So University of Connecticut sued the ACC after they took Boston College and Syracuse and Pitt and that whole Big East to the ACC. And you can even go back to the Metro Conference in the early 90s when there was a lawsuit filed by Virginia Tech and Virginia Commonwealth, over the ended up being the dissolvement of the Metro Conference. So I think we're going to hear saber rattling, and there's going to be attorneys that are going to make some money out of it. But at the end of the day, there's probably some type of a settlement involved.
Billable hours are undefeated in realignment, aren't they?
They sure are. So, but as far as from a rebuild standpoint, you first look within your footprint, and there's some FBS schools currently in the footprint. UTEP, one of those schools that got left behind back in 1998, that stayed with the WAC for a while, and now has been with Conference USA for 20 plus years almost. And then New Mexico State was a part of the WAC, but never got into any serious consideration by the Mountain West. I mean, those have been reported. And then the FBS schools that in 2012, before we kind of shut things down, the Montana State, Cal Davis, Cal Poly, Sacramento State, we're all part of our plan, or my plan, to try to rebuild the WAC at that time, and they elected to stay, with the Big Sky, and so I'm sure that those schools will come above. One thing I think that listeners and readers need to remember: Hawaii is a football member only for the Mountain West, and their NCAA classification is an FBS conference, the same that the Pac-12 has in terms of 8 members. While they may have CFP recognition as 8 football playing members, the NCAA requires them to have 8, full-time members, core members, for all of their other, automatic qualifications, basketball, and all the way down the line to all their other AQ sports. So, I think that right now, I'm sure that they're looking at how do they get to that 8 core, so they don't, have any vulnerability down the road in terms of losing any of their AQ. But I don't have any question that the Mountain West is going to, to come back. They'll come back without those 4, and even if they lost a couple more, I'm sure that they can come back. And then it's a matter of how do they compete against them. And I've talked to a former AD, former football coach from one of the Mountain West schools, and he lived the WAC days back then, and I think that he's no longer employed by University X, but he certainly is ready to put the flag up and put it in the ground and compete against the ones that left.
Karl, I'm curious, something you mentioned earlier. Given where college sports is headed with the revenue sharing piece, how likely do you think it would be that Big Sky, any of the top FCS schools, Montana's, Dakota's, would be willing to make the financial commitment that is going to be required whenever this House settlement takes effect?
Good question, John. And I think that the initiation fee, or the membership fee, to move from FCS to FBS is now increased. You talk about a big jump. It went from $5,000 to $5 million. Yep. And there hasn't been an FBS school, I don't believe, that has made that jump with that price tag. I don't think that will stand in the way. If it comes down to the Mountain West needing those schools, or if they believe that some of those FBS schools are the answer for their future, I'm sure that the Mountain West will have a surplus of some revenues from the departure fees and such, that $5 million isn't going to stand in the way. As far as the future, I think that same question can be asked of any of the group of 5, the 65 group of 5 members. How do they afford the future landscape under the House settlement? And I think that Fortunately, we're seeing some Group of 5 wins over the first 3 weeks of the season that I think has energized the competitive piece. I always used to say that the economic gap was going to increase all the time, and it increased every year, and that the economic gap was, you were never going to be able to chase that economic gap. But as long as there were 85 scholarships, the competitive gap was going to stay the same. And then with NIL and pay for play, you wonder whether that was going to still be the case. But some of the experts out there just say there's too many really, really good college, really good high school players, and there's good college players that are sitting the bench in other places, and that maybe that competitive gap, won't be as large, but the economic gap, it may be insurmountable.
Yep.
Karl, when you look at what the Pac-12 is doing, it looks like, they're just gathering the schools that have the most media value. What media contract is out there for a conference like the Mountain West? If the left behind schools, is there enough value there to have a deal that makes this worth keeping that conference together, or do you worry that this could be the end of the road?
Well, again, I think what comes first, will there be a Boise State that comes out of the new Mountain West that jumps to New Year's Day and makes that type of an impact? Back after 2007, the value of the WAC increased significantly with the Boise State. Now it was centered on Boise State bringing that value. And once Boise State left the WAC for the Mountain West, it didn't take ESPN long to call me and tell me that that the rights fee had just been reduced, based on the membership contract. So some of that is individual schools and how they can drive it. But I think it's going to take some immediate success beginning right now, beginning this season, in terms of establishing value. I think that the days of looking at at the metropolitan area and the DMA of a school and believing that that's going to be the key. We learned that in the WAC when Rice does not deliver Houston. Even back in those days, SMU and TCU really didn't deliver Dallas. San Jose certainly did not deliver the Bay Area. So I think that with the metrics they have now and the data that they're compiling in terms of who really is a media, who really has media value, the metrics are there. And I think that some of the reasons that those 4 schools were taken is that I've been led to believe that those 4 schools had the highest viewership, over a 8 or 10 year period, and some that got left out that maybe were surprised to get left out, did not have that viewership history. So, the media companies now, they've been smart, a long time, but they've thrown money at some bad product in the past. And I think that in today's corporate world, those media companies are not going to overpay for product.
Is there a school that's in the left behind group in the Mountain West that you think could be a star? Let's just say there's no more schools were to leave for the Pac-12, and it's those 8, and maybe they add a few. Just based on your knowledge of the institutions and the resources, the support, do you see one that could become, the next Boise, for instance?
I think UNLV right now, with their 2 wins over the Big 12 teams right now, have got everybody's attention.
Yep.
And yet their viewership history for the last 8 to 10 years has not been very good because they haven't had that. Be interesting to see if they can capitalize now on that. I certainly would be promoting UNLV right now for that Group of 5 spot with those 2 wins over over Big 12 teams. And can they keep it going, and can they keep their coach? I think they've always had that that anticipation that they were gonna be the next team to explode, and maybe this is the right time. And again, that's the type of team they need right now to get the attention of new media partners. But then it's some of the others that, I mean, San Jose State has had some great success the last few years. Can they keep it going? The Air Force Academy is a team that always is going to have national attention. Utah State, growing population. So I think looking back, to what I was left with, the 8 schools that I was left with, 4 of them were in the Central Time Zone, along with UTEP and Hawaii and San Jose State, and that group. So I think that there's a good core there. I think Hawaii is an important piece on this. I worry about Hawaii that this could be a further hindrance to their development, but I think they need to shock the world. That's we always hear about every Saturday that who's going to shock the world this Saturday. I think some Mountain West teams need to shock the world. UNLV has shocked the world the last couple weeks.
Karl, can you maybe take a look at the Pac-12 strategy from your you've been the commissioner of 3 different conferences. What do you see them doing? And is it their best play, their only play? How do you kind of read their strategy?
Again, I think they're putting a lot of emphasis on their consultant and developing the media strategy that is not just based on population, that it's based on accurate viewership. And I know that they obviously are looking to go outside of their footprint. I was always, I thought footprint was important to the regionality of a conference. And, what I was left with in the WAC with that 16 teams, and it may have been one of the reasons that it failed, but that conference went from Tulsa to Honolulu and Houston to Laramie. That was one of the biggest footprints, except for what now, the Pac or the Big Ten and the ACC that are going coast to coast. But if you throw in the 3,000 miles to Hawaii, Tulsa to Hawaii is actually further than LA to Rutgers. So, the WAC may have had the largest footprint, but certainly did not have the viewership. And, I know that they're looking in the time zone and TV windows. And so the Central Time Zone comes into play. They look at recruiting, and Texas comes into play as they are throwing out particular names in Texas. I gave the speech. I brought both Texas State and UT San Antonio into the WAC right before I left, and then Texas State ended up coming to the Sun Belt with me, and UT San Antonio went to Conference USA. But those were both programs back in 2008 or 9 or 10ish. That when I went onto their campus, my speech is that there's no reason that these 2 schools can't be the next Boise State. So as I went to the Sun Belt, I used that all the time about the next Boise State. So I think they've got options, and again, it appears that they have some time on their side. But I think that it's critical that they get it done. If not before the first of the year, then shortly thereafter, just so they can settle in and get their TV deal done as well.
Yeah, well, hold on that point. So if July 1, 2026 is their deadline to kind of reconstitute as an 8-member conference, what kind of lead time do you need to do that stuff? Help us form a timeline for, when they need to go to market and get everybody in position.
I think that you reported it the other day after we talked about, the July 1, 26 date is really is not a good date to focus on. That, member schools, whether it's schools from the American or schools from the Sun Belt or Conference USA or whoever they're thinking about, or even the existing Mountain West, all have membership requirements that require that 1 year notification. And a year ago at this time, Mountain West had, a $35 million exit fee, and given 1 year notice, it went down to 17. And so I think that there's generally a 1 year notification for all conferences to give notice, unless they're willing to buy their way out, for more money. So, most often the timing and the procedural is schools give notice sometime in, the spring or late spring, early summer. They may buy their way out of the following year in terms of an exit year and a lame duck year. Some have done it, some haven't. Some have an immediate move into a conference. Some of that I think will depend on what their TV deal is and how fast they want their TV revenue to kick in. Is there enough money to pay some early outs? But I think generally speaking that the deadline, in my opinion, would be July 1, 2025, that they have to have this thing all wrapped up.
So Karl, you got, UTSA and Texas State brought up to, FBS level. What do you see as their potential, either as, Pac-12 members or otherwise? Do you think that either of those schools or both could be a Boise State?
It took Texas State almost 10 years from when they made that move to show last week when they played Arizona State at home that perhaps that potential is there now. And oftentimes it just takes that right coach, that one coach to get them there. And I think that both Texas State and UT San Antonio, their most recent coaching moves have definitely provided a level of success that they didn't have before. They've always had that. They're in the middle of Texas. They've got the Texas population. They've got the Texas fan base. They've got the passion for football. Texas State redid their stadium 7 or 8 years ago, and the other night, that was a very, very positive Texas State advertisement right there. Obviously, a game that they very well could have won as well. UT San Antonio plays downtown. They play in the dome, which probably isn't as positive as the Texas State campus stadium. But again, I think that UT San Antonio has those spots. What's been reported today, the Memphis Tulane. Tulane built a new stadium on campus several years ago, and they've got it going, and they've had some football success, with the coaches that have been there. And Memphis, certainly a win over Florida State this week, probably couldn't come in at a better time. The old Liberty Bowl is going under, significant renovation and trying to make that into a better college football environment. So, there's a couple that are there. Tulsa, I think has made an investment. The question there comes is, will the new Pac-12 be any better than the current American Conference? And that's being debated. And my good friend Tim Pernetti, was in Memphis yesterday. And that was by plan. It wasn't coincidence. It was coincidental that it all hit. But he was very bold in his statements about his conference, and likely he should be. That what they have. But again, the American, with all due respect to Tim and Mike Resco, the American Conference isn't what it was 2 years ago at this time, when they had Cincinnati and Houston and SMU and Central Florida. So I think we have to be realistic and acknowledge that the American is not the conference that it was 2 years ago.
What do you expect Air Force and UNLV mindset to be right now? And, you've been on the other side of that table watching schools as they have to do what's best for themselves. But, help us understand Air Force and UNLV, what they might be thinking right now.
The kind of the mindset is always, we need to do what's in our best interests, and not necessarily the conference's best interest. And, that's been a 20-year, 25-year declaration that AD and president have made time and time and time again about decisions that they've made. Air Force is unique, and its relationship with Navy and Army, makes it appear that would be a good marriage. People forget Navy and Army, they're football only members in the American, and all their other sports, which is important to the academies. Army and Navy are in smaller D1 conferences. Patriot is one. They may both be in the Patriot. I'm not sure, but so all their other sports are in smaller, more homogeneous type conferences. Air Force would be pretty stuck if they had to take all their sports into the American. Now, perhaps there's a spot for them in whether it's the Big West or the West Coast Conference or the redone WAC that has schools in in Utah and Arizona that might be geographically fitting. So Air Force would have to find probably a place for their other sports. Again, I think UNLV is sitting there right now as an attractive, except for their previous television history, they're sitting pretty good right now in terms of the relationship with the city of Las Vegas. I mean, back in the days, Las Vegas was almost taboo, and now they're not just the entertainment capital of the world; they're becoming the sports entertainment capital, and I think that has value as well.
Karl, you mentioned that the American is not what it once was. Totally true. Neither's the Pac-12. Neither's the Big 12. The ACC is embroiled in this, revolt. Everybody has deteriorated in some regard, except for the SEC and Big Ten, right? So where are we headed? 5 years, 10 years? Is it just the SEC and Big Ten and everybody else is effectively a group of 7? How do you see this whole thing playing out?
I announced my retirement from the Sun Belt back in the summer of 2018, and I worked the next year. And I was asked many times back in 2018 where I thought everything was headed. And kind of at the same time, I think the AD at Oregon was Pat Kilhaney, who suggested, he's a corporate guy, he's a business guy, and I had met him before, but we really didn't have any interaction. But we both kind of had the same message, was that eventually college football is going to get to a 40, 60, 80 group of teams that back in those days you didn't want to say professionalized. Now it's a pretty common word. But I think that we both suggested that there might be a college football Inc. that consisted of 40, 60, 80 teams that developed an NFL model that still affiliated with the universities, that became ancillary units of the universities. They still wore the uniform, and they had the logo on their chest of the universities, and they played in university stadiums. But it would be more professionalized, and that was 7-8 years ago now. And how close are we to that right now is pretty darn close. Except for that breakaway, that they are operating as professionalized, pay for play units. And what's going to be the trigger where there really becomes a football only? I mean, it's been suggested by the Knight Commission. It's been suggested by, President Baker at the NCAA that football be taken out. And I think that this House settlement is being done to try to protect and save college football from college football becoming professionalized. I don't know how long that can be held on to, though. But that's, I suggested it that 7-8 years ago, and I would say that we're sure a lot closer to that today than we were 8 years ago.
Carl, we ask our guests for a bit of life advice that maybe they got coming up. I would love for you to give us maybe an answer to that, but also what advice would you give Gloria Nevarez, the Mountain West Commissioner? Hydrate, wear sunscreen. I mean, what are you saying right now to Gloria?
Well, first question, I've listened to your show sometimes, and I'd forgotten that this question was coming. So I didn't get to prepare like some did, but I had a mentor, a longtime senior associate athletic director at the University of Utah by the name of Ned Alger. And back in my early days, I wanted to be a Division I AD. And I was interviewing for the AD job at Weber State. I was working at the NCAA. It was late 1980s. I was 37, 38 years old. And I thought I had that job at Weber State. And I ultimately didn't get it. And Ned told me, sometimes it's that job you don't get that really is critical and crucial to your career. And I've used that with a lot of aspiring young ADs or just staff members who go out and get crushed, discouraged that they didn't get a particular job. This is a pretty good example, and it's got a little bit of history to it. That Greg Byrne was a young, associate AD at the University of Kentucky, had roots in the state of Idaho. His dad had been at Idaho State. Bill Byrne had been at Idaho State. The Utah State job was open, and Greg fell in love with that job, and I encouraged him. I recommended him. Utah State was coming out of a bad AD situation, and he interviewed. He knocked it out of the park, and was recommended to the president for that job. And the president said, "We can't have a young AD. We need an experienced AD." And they ended up hiring Randy Spettman, who had been the AD at Air Force Academy. And Greg was just discouraged. He went back to Kentucky. He actually got out of intercollegiate athletics. But I told him then, sometimes, Greg, it's that job that you don't get that makes that big difference. And we know that the path that Greg took from, he got back into athletics. He went back down to, I think, the Mississippi State or Ole Miss, and he becomes the AD at Arizona State, at Arizona, and today is the AD at Alabama. So, I think that example to young aspiring athletic administrators coming up can be important. So, I remember telling Scott Barnes that when he didn't get a couple jobs as he was trying to leave, Eastern Washington for jobs, and he gets the job at Utah State and parlays that to Pittsburgh, and now back at Oregon State. So there's some good advice. As far as Gloria, I mean, it is the anxiety that commissioners have building a conference and doing all the energized things. When you get something like this thrown at you, the staff is important. Make sure your staff is kept in the loop, and you forget that that their careers are on the line, and their jobs are on the line here when it comes. So don't isolate yourself. Use your staff, use your colleagues, and hope for some good breaks. Hope for some of those teams. Hope that UNLV gets hot, but not too hot, because if they get too hot, then they're going to the Pac-12 or the Big 12 or wherever else. So, but I'll be rooting for all those former WAC teams. That's for sure.
Karl, thanks so much for joining us and bringing your vast storehouse of firsthand experience to this whole thing. It has been tremendously insightful. for us, for our listeners, for fans of the Mountain West and the Pac-12 too. You kind of firsthand look at how everything is unfolding. I appreciate that very much.
My pleasure. And when you think that the three of us go back to those early days, and you guys covered it, and both in San Jose and Fresno, and it's fun listening to you now do your expertise live and on stage. Good job.
Well, thanks, Karl. I appreciate you and wish you the best. I think you did just incredible insight there. You've lived through it, and I am sure our viewers and listeners enjoyed it. Thanks, Karl.
Thanks. Hey, one last thing. I sent you a picture. My daughter's in broadcast media back in Memphis, and she does a morning show on Grind City Media, which is the digital arm of the Memphis Grizzlies. And she went to Southern Cal as a longtime Pac-10, Pac-12 fan, and she was sporting her Pac-12 visor this morning on air as she was talking about your reporting on Memphis and the possible Pac-12. So you've got a big fan there in Memphis.
Well, thanks, Karl. Appreciate it.
Okay, fellas.
Thank you, Karl. Be good.
You too. Right. Stay healthy.
All right, Jon Wilner, let's kick this around, man. As you look at what, he lived it, he went through it. I think we are watching history repeat itself in many ways, with a lot of this stuff, but your takeaways.
He covered all of the key pieces, the legal piece, the institutional aspect, which I think, kind of gets lost sometimes. Is it the right fit? Sure, it's about the media money. Everybody knows that. But, for the FCS schools, is it worthwhile making the jump given where the NCAA is going? I thought he had some great points there. The fact that he is, he was the one who basically propped up UTSA and Texas State into major college football. I thought that was kind of a fascinating look at those two schools because they are very much in play for the Pac-12. The whole experience he's been through, what it was like when the Mountain West was formed with that secret meeting in the airport. It's just great stuff.
Yeah. And I think, we've both kind of looked at the schools themselves, like Oregon State, Washington State in particular, the angst that they felt when that ultimate morning where they're getting left behind. And even the anxiety at Utah and other places as there was some uncertainty, Stanford and Cal having to grab the life raft in the ACC. I think Karl Benson provides an opportunity to kind of see be in the shoes of a commissioner who's trying to hold it together, whose job it is to keep this thing together. And you've got 4 schools who have banded together very quietly, very privately. Gloria Nevarez was aware that the Pac-12 was talking to some of her schools, or that their consulting firm was talking to some of the schools. But I don't think she expected Wednesday night, Thursday morning of last week that she was losing those schools. Yep. I think they kept it very close together. A couple things you've reported on, I've reported on. Yeah, I thought you had a great piece about the UNLV Nevada connection and the idea that the Board of Regents in the state of Nevada could stand in the way of that. What did you find out there?
Well, I talked to one of the regents, Heather Brown, and she said, basically the regents have no idea where this is coming from. One of them was quoted in the Las Vegas Review-Journal last week saying, I can't see how Nevada and UNLV should be in separate conferences. And, Heather Brown kind of shot that down. And she told me, there's nothing that's structurally keeping them together. The regents would have no problem if they're separated. They've been separated many years in the past. So that to me doesn't seem like it's going to prevent the Pac-12 from getting UNLV if they decide that they want UNLV. It is not like the Cal and UCLA situation. Nevada higher education is very different than California higher education in terms of the power structure, and the regents have the authority. And she indicated nobody would stop if they thought it was right for UNLV. Nobody's going to stop them because of Nevada.
Interesting too, because as I am talking with the 4 schools that are coming in and talking with sources around the Pac-12, part of this defection of 4 schools, that the one piece that surprised me was how quiet they kept it. And, we knew that they were unhappy. We knew that eventually this could be the ultimate resolution, but we didn't really get the rumblings in the 24 hours before the move that you get with some of these other moves across college football. But I kind of wonder if the reason they didn't bring UNLV along was they didn't even want to have that conversation with UNLV in Nevada, knowing that UNLV probably turns to their board of, turns to their regents and goes, hey, we're doing this thing. Nevada's going to be alerted to it. I kind of think maybe the reason that UNLV wasn't included was that they wanted to keep it on the down low, and they were going, look, we can always go back and get UNLV later, but we need to keep this between the four who left. That's my theory, at least, on why UNLV wasn't initially included. Or maybe the Pac-12 and their consulting firm believes they can circle back at some point and pick up UNLV as maybe the ninth school. Maybe there's a better 7 and 8 option out there.
Yeah, I think that's probably both. I think there's a lot to your theory. I believe they would have had to post the meeting, so it would have become public. And also, I think what Karl said is true. UNLV's football viewership is not great. It's not been great, so that's probably that undermined their media valuation. I think that's part of it, and they'll be there, right? Yeah. They're going to be there.
Yeah. Let's Memphis and Tulane. Pac-12 obviously looking at those two schools. They're at the top of the list. I think they've got media value. They've got some football history. They've got viewership. It was interesting to me to kind of take the temperature in Memphis, checking in with media members there. Like, how is that going over? And seems to be a lot of enthusiasm for it. You heard Karl talk about his daughter, who's, one of the media members there wearing a Pac-12 hat, and Gary Parrish and others saying it's time to make the move. I get the strategy of it, but beyond that, I was told that South Florida reached out to the Pac-12 after the 4 Mountain West schools, left. South Florida was one of those schools that reached out and sort of said, hey, what about us? That's interesting. I mean, as long as you're flying to New Orleans or you're flying to Memphis, why not go to Tampa?
Yeah, it's right around the corner.
Right. But, Air Force to me doesn't fit unless you have Army and Navy with them. So I don't see as much of a value there. But what do you make of kind of the next move of the Pac-12?
I think it's a little bit of a chicken and egg situation, because if you're Memphis or South Florida or Tulane, you're only going to make the move if it makes sense financially, right? So the American those schools are getting, let's say, $7 million on average in media money. Okay. They need guarantees that they're going to get substantially more than that to make it worthwhile with the travel and everything that comes with it. But how can the Pac-12 give them a guarantee without having those schools in it? Now, they're going to do their best. Their consultants are going to do their best. But at some point, it might come down to, those schools either going to have to make a leap of faith, or they're going to say, you know what, we don't have enough concrete evidence to justify a major move like this. And I have to think, Tim Pernetti's a sharp guy over at the American. I'm sure that they're talking about things that they can do to keep those schools, unequal revenue sharing. That's part of the ACC conversation with Clemson and Florida State. I'm sure that that's going to be talked about in the American to try to keep a few of those schools. But we should know. I'm hearing it's probably going to be a couple weeks, but I would think that by the middle of October, we could have some more news.
Yeah, and I think, a source told me that this first 4 schools, had to be kept really quiet. There was not a lot of discussion about, okay, what after this? But that's part of the reason why they're taking a beat here. They are meeting this week. The 6 members are meeting and talking. They're talking about the next step. Tulane, Memphis. Is it South Florida? Are you interested in going there? Do you go back for UNLV? Is there someone else? And also, I've been told that 9 is the number they'd like. I asked about basketball. I was told this is a football move right now. Gonzaga has been talked about, for months and months and months among the Pac-12 members, even a year ago. Is basketball a factor? If you get Memphis in this conference, now you got Memphis and San Diego State. You've got, Colorado State, and Boise State. It's not a bad basketball conference, Wilner. I mean, as a silver lining.
No, it's not. And if you had UNLV,
yeah,
there's some history there for sure. Maybe that's how you end up going after Gonzaga too. I would say there's nothing that's off the table. I think you're right that football is the focus now, but I would not be surprised at all if eventually they make a move for Gonzaga, and the Zags would have to decide what is the reality of the Big 12 for us, and is that something that could really happen anytime soon? I'm not sure that's the case, and so they'd have to make a decision. But this could be very interesting to watch because they are taking the approach that everything is on the table for us.
And I originally went to Gonzaga and St. Mary's, and I thought, would they be interested? And then, I had a source tell me, well, what about Grand Canyon? Would Grand Canyon be more attractive than St. Mary's? And I think they would. And they are risk takers, right? They are not afraid to build a campus, build a stadium, hire a coach.
They got a lot of money.
They've got money there. And so I think it's interesting, would Grand Canyon and Gonzaga come in as basketball schools? And what does it make that conference? But again, these decisions are made football first. Basketball, I would expect to be a couple of months after the football decisions are made. But I was told nothing in the next 48 to 72 hours. And that's as far out as some of my sources were willing to talk because you have Scott Barnes at Oregon State. He's in the press box at the Civil War saying, we need to wrap this up sooner rather than later. And I think that created a little bit of a frenzy, a little bit of urgency, but you're no longer a conference of 2 making a decision. You're now a conference of 6. And so you've got to clear calendars. You've got to get the presidents. You got to get the ADs together, your consulting firm. Decisions will get made, but I am fascinated to see what happens next.
Absolutely. Should we talk real quickly about this week?
Yes, let's do it.
What games have got your
the most interesting games of the week? And here's I'm going to start with this one. All right, I made my list of the most interesting games of the week. Look, Stanford's getting on a plane, Wilner, at 1:00. Probably by the time people are watching this, Stanford's getting on a plane to fly across the country to go play Syracuse. Here is the first example of how weird is college football today as Stanford heads to Syracuse. This game's Friday. Look, it's not like a big high-profile game, but it caught my attention. And, I see Stanford getting on a plane to go play Syracuse. What about you? Give me one of your most interesting games.
Friday also, San Jose State's playing Washington State. And I'm curious to see what the hangover is in Pullman, right? The party has still got to be going straight from Saturday afternoon after the Apple Cup. So are the Cougars going to be – San Jose State's not bad. They beat Air Force. Are the Cougars going to be focused? Because they have they got a lot in front of them. If they can keep winning, they become a potential playoff candidate. They got to keep winning though. And one loss and that's off the table. So I'm interested to see how the Cougars respond with a short week.
I've been buying Arizona State, so I'm going to keep talking about Arizona State. Kenny Dillingham is 3-0. His team is going to Texas Tech, really a difficult place to play. But, there's a chance he could start this season 4-0. And so that game's got my attention Saturday morning as maybe my second interesting game of the week.
Gotcha. Okay. I'll take Cal, Florida State.
Ooh, yeah.
Yep. Undefeated Cal against winless Florida State, right? Who figured that would ever be the case? And if Cal wins, they got Miami coming to Berkeley. That will be the biggest game Cal has had. I would say since, I'm going back. Remember Cal, Oregon State, like 2007 or 8, Cal could have been number 1 if they had beaten the Beavers. And I think they threw an interception in the end zone. But that'll be Miami Cal will be a huge game if the Bears can beat Florida State.
I remember after that Cal Oregon State game asking Mike Riley. I said to Mike Riley, how does it feel to prove everybody wrong? And I had written that week, there's no way Oregon State can win this game. And Mike Riley looked up and he said, "You mean you?" And so I'll never forget that. He funny response in a news conference. I'll take my third one. Purdue's going to Oregon State. And look, this is not a great Purdue team, but it's a Big Ten team showing up a week after Oregon clobbered Oregon State in the Civil War. Big bounce back opportunity for Trent Bray and Oregon State. They have to stay visible. We've talked about the mission there. It's staying relevant. It's staying visible. It's getting to a bowl game. Great opportunity, not only with Purdue, but then you have a game later in the season at Cal for Oregon State. So, there's some Power 5 opportunities on the schedule that would only help who? Washington State later in the year. Washington State presumably could be meeting Oregon State with, a college football playoff at-large berth on the line for Washington State. So Oregon State can be a helper here. Go win this game against a Big Ten opponent. Help yourself. Maybe help make the Pac-2 or Pac-12 look better later in the year.
Gotcha. Yes, indeed. I'll take Utah at Oklahoma State. Huge game in the Big 12. Big 12, first ever game for Utah in the Big 12. Cam Rising's going to be back. Those two and Kansas State, probably the favorites. The winner of that game has got the inside track for the Big 12, number one seed in that in their conference championship. But that is a huge game that's gotten a little bit lost in the shuffle. But I definitely wanted to mention it because that's a big one.
Is it just me, or do you need to see Cam Rising on the field to believe he's playing? I just think last year we did this every week. Is he in? Is he out? Kyle Whittingham has got his reasons. He's got his strategy. He's not going to change. But, we don't really know what's going to happen until we see Rising on the field. And they're different. They're different with him in uniform. And they're just a better, different team. And, he might be the MVP of the Big 12 just because what he means to Utah.
Yeah, no doubt. I got the sense from Whittingham's comments this week that he was more optimistic, it seemed like, than he ever was last season. So
I don't know.
That's why I'm thinking he's gonna.
I've been conditioned. I'm like Pavlov's dog over here because I got to see it to believe it. All right, great stuff. Make sure that you're subscribed to this podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, thank you for watching here. Share it with friends and family. Just hit that subscribe button for us and make sure you don't miss anything. You can read Wilner at wilnerhotline.com. You can read me at joncanzano.com. Thanks for being here, everybody.
Thanks very much.